Welcome to the Techne Connect Automotive podcast, aimed at inspiring the next generation of EE-related talent to choose a career within our space, whilst also supporting the current EE talent pool in making key career decisions. In each episode, we interview industry leaders to discuss their unique career paths, advice for those starting out in the automotive industry, as well as important issues currently impacting the sector. My name is Ferris, and I'm responsible for connecting automotive businesses to the best EE-related talent. Today we have Jamie Wardlaw join us from Lucid Motors. Jamie is a Scotsman that has worked in the UK, travelled to Sweden, worked in Detroit, and is now living in Canada whilst travelling frequently to the San Francisco Bay Area working for Lucid. His career decision making has been split between what he can achieve in the industry whilst making sure the move gives him what he truly wants outside of work, and he's currently now fulfilling his skiing passion. In this episode, we'll delve into his valuable insights for a successful career, as well as how he's taken full advantage of the global automotive industry. Jamie, first of all, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good, Ferris. Thanks for asking.
Do you want to give a quick introduction of who you are, Jamie, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jamie Wardlaw. I'm a senior manager of systems engineering at Lucid Motors, based out of California. And yeah, I've been doing this for, related to this, 20-something years, across a bunch of industries. So yeah, we're, people who don't know Lucid, we're one of the EV startup companies, although, you know, we're not so much a startup anymore, cars in production. Almost 1.5, 2 years into production. So yeah, and I've been working with them for 3.5 years, 4 years. It'll be 4 years this year. So from prior to the start of production, before we've seen the growth, and yeah, through production to where we are now.
Fantastic. And before we obviously jump into your career, you know, we've got a Scotsman obviously working in California, but what's been really refreshing when speaking with you, you've like blended your career decisions with also your personal aspirations, which has been really good to see. Do you want to talk through how you've ended up living in California and where you're living at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I started, Scottish, obviously. There's no hiding it. I went to university, studied mechanical engineering. I always had a bias towards software, so I got the degree, but I've never mechanically engineered anything, not really. Straight into software out of university. Did embedded C with a software house down in England.
Yeah.
That taught me a lot about programming. It taught me, that was what were we doing? Set-top boxes, the GSM network upgrade for the UK. So it was all, you know, deep embedded C on Unix servers and things. I definitely learned that there's C programmers out there who are very good C programmers. And maybe I was not in the same class as them. So, and then ultimately that was a great company to work with, a company called IPL. They started to introduce me to what it means to do software safely. We did a lot of defense work at that company as well, and they were somewhat renowned for developing a test tool called Cantata. So, you know, there was no getting away from it. We respected the software and what could go wrong with it. For one reason or another, we were waiting on contracts, and I didn't want to wait any longer for some work back in Scotland.
No.
So I decided to turn back towards something I was more interested in, which, you know, I started to realize you could do software for cars.
Yeah.
And yeah, I picked up a job after about 2 years doing in the embedded C. I got a job doing controls with a company called Pi Technology in Bath.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of Formula One chatter around around Pi Technology at that time. They also had a F1 division. We did all the wiring harnesses and a lot of the electronics. We did a lot of stuff for actually Colin McRae's rally car.
Brilliant.
So there was a lot of really cool stuff in the company. They were owned by Ford, and I ended up working actually on the Ford Hybrid Escape. So Lucid's not the first EV I worked on. I was doing the battery pack, battery temperature sensors and controls for the Hybrid Escape. And that was way back in the early 2000s.
Really early doors.
And that's kind of where I started to learn about how automotive delivers controls and safety-related controls before the days of ISO 26262. So we were using like the 61508
Yeah.
functional safety standards. We were doing all that, so we were exposed to that early. We still hand-coded. Nobody auto-coded then. So we'd do our designs in Simulink. We would hand-code it. We would rigorously test it. We did all the verification, validation. Even hardware-in-the-loop systems were very, very expensive. So
Yeah.
they were almost, actually Pi Technology had one called the Pi AutoSim, so you got some exposure to that as well. So yeah, the end-to-end software development included a bit of time in Dearborn, Michigan, supporting Ford on site.
Yeah.
But then when things grew old, I moved to work with Delphi Diesel.
Yeah.
I ended up working on some diesel injection systems for Daimler. We also delivered, I was on-site applications engineer at Dunton for the Ford fuel system, or for the Delphi fuel injection system that we were putting on the Ford engines, and they were shared with Volvo at the time. So there's about 30 or 40 of us on the team delivering the injection control. So again, everything, all very similar subject matter, some of it safety related. But I wanted to do on my weekends what people do on their holidays, typically in the UK. So
Yeah.
snowboarding, mountain biking, and yeah, I came back from one of those vacations. I think it was snowboarding. And my mate threw me an automotive press and said, well, why don't you go and join this company in Canada? And I said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. And applied to them. And
Brilliant.
3 months later, took an interview at Heathrow. And there's kind of a funny interview. Car broke down on the way, so I turned up covered in oil. And they loved that because you were a controls engineer. Yeah, they gave me the job and I moved to Canada 3 months later once visas were in place.
Fantastic.
And I worked with a company called Westport for 4.5 years, led the proof of concept on the Ford Volvo HPDI engine. So we were adapting the dual injector system, natural gas and diesel, to Volvo engines. And it was super interesting. It was like awesome to work with Volvo. The engineers there did everything right, which was refreshing. And it was a really good supplier kind of engagement with a tier one. And I was lucky enough to be able to travel back into Europe on the company's coin.
Yeah.
So I could still visit family. And yeah, I could ski and snowboard and mountain bike in the North Shore of Vancouver. Eventually, we actually moved out. My now wife, we both moved to Squamish, which, for those who don't know, is between Vancouver and Whistler. Probably, arguably, one of the best mountain bike places in the world.
Brilliant.
And I was lucky enough to live there for 7.5 years. And I actually then left automotive for a bit and worked with a local company delivering safety systems to oil and gas, which is obviously big in Canada. So there's a bit of a common thread there. It was always software and safety systems. And I did it for 7 years. We delivered some of the biggest fired heaters that have ever been built in the world, if not the oil sands. And again, you can't make mistakes with those things because when they go up, you wipe out whole sites. So there's no room for error. Like, they're very safety conscious. I'd argue way more than automotive.
Yeah.
Automotive's adjusting to it now and what can go wrong, but oil and gas, they can't take risks. And one reason or another, that came to an end. That included delivering a safety controller, and I was lucky enough to do all the hardware, coordinate the hardware. I didn't do the design, but supply chain sourcing, all of that, all the approvals with, I think it was UL we used for our approvals. So we did all of that. I did all the embedded software on a safety micro. So you got to do it end to end, but you were also exposed to the business end of things, which was kind of cool. And then for whatever reason, I decided to have a crack at automotive again. And a colleague of mine from Westport worked with Lucid back when they were Ativa. So I had a crack at that, and the rest is, well, it's the last 3.5 years of history. So,
couple of questions for you. So, obviously, people who obviously bring up from either the UK or if they learn in Germany, enter the industry in Germany or even the US. Do you feel there's any differences between working in the US compared to working in the UK as an example, or what's your perspective?
I've always thought North America has a totally, well, what's the word, unjustified belief that you should work all the time and somehow it produces better results. You know, the whole 10 days of holidays and 15 if you're lucky. Their biggest thing of the year seems to be a 2-day holiday at Thanksgiving. Like they'd rather, the companies want you to be in the office all the time, which is for no good reason that I've found in the last 14 years. What I have seen is that the companies are no more productive or successful than the ones that are in Europe. And I found that in Europe when we worked with them as well. We had much more, let's say, vacation time. We were way more productive during the day. The office environments were more productive. And they were more fun. That's North America. A lot of the offices are devoid of any fun. It's quite bizarre. In Canada specifically, like you could hear a pin drop.
Yeah,
it was almost like people didn't want to talk to each other. So there's a lot of cultural differences in how they approach it. I definitely prefer the UK. It was definitely, from that side of work, it was more fun, and I think it was more balanced. And you were just as productive. So people need to ask questions as to what they're doing when they're at work 300 and God knows how many days a year.
Yeah.
And they're not getting anything more done. So
it's an interesting insight, isn't it? If you go through, obviously you've had over 20 years now experience. Looking back in your career, what's been your flagship moments, Jamie? What you're really proud of? What have you enjoyed working on? What have you had the luxury of working on as well?
I still talk about my time at university. I took a couple of. I didn't really do the traveling thing in summers. I went and got work. So I wanted to do the work thing.
Yeah.
So I got a job with Babcock Forsyth Defence and was lucky enough to work on the refit of a nuclear submarine, HMS Superb, which was and they invited me back the year after. Unfortunately, I wanted to try new things. Didn't want to, be pigeonholed as being a Royal Navy, whatever, employee straight out of uni. So, yeah, it was amazing though, like the things you seen and the things you learned, the controls they put in place as they refit those ships. Again, maybe that was the start of this safety-orientated mindset, and that, we couldn't even leave a valve in the wrong place. Like non-magnetic parts had to be so carefully controlled, or those guys don't come back up in the, in the submarines or with the minesweepers. The non-magnetic areas have to be respected, or magnetic things and minesweepers don't go well together. So there was lots of really cool stuff you've seen, and then so I enjoyed getting that job. I then got a placement with BP Chemicals through the graduate schemes the following year. That was my first exposure to oil and gas. So I was, those career achievements, if you like, were good.
Yeah, especially from an early stage.
Yeah, and then later on, I suppose I've always managed to do exactly what I've set my mind on doing. Whenever I've went to get a job, I've got the job. And it's just a fact. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any that I've not managed to. I've actually rejected as many jobs as I've accepted. That was always good. I think the career's gone pretty well, but yeah, more like we've talked about it before, the balance of trying to do what you want to do at the same time as doing your job. I think you can, work-life balance can be found.
Yeah.
And then more, at Lucid, we've launched Car of the Year.
Yeah, it's great.
Under that, no, I won't pretend I contributed as much as some of the guys I know who had been there 4 or 5 years previous, but that was, that'll always be there. It's pretty cool. And I think there's more Cars of the Year to come, to be honest. So Also, the Volvo gig, I see the Volvo trucks. They're now driving around. They're advertised online sometimes. And, you worked. I was in the first meeting with them on site in Gothenburg, or at least I believe I was. Certainly there at the first engine start. Me and a friend of mine to this day, we started up that first engine. So all of those things are cool. And the things I did in oil and gas, that they'll run for like 100, maybe 100 years plus.
Yeah.
And also people have asked for you to come back and do things again. So I know, like, the oil and gas world, I had a few people who were asking, for your name to go and do things.
Absolutely.
These are some of the biggest companies in the world. So you can't help but take a bit of pride in that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think looking at your career, looking at the journey you've gone through, I think it's quite clear. You've mastered the dark art of being able to adapt to the safety critical industry in general, not just automotive, other industries as discussed. If you went back to Jamie at 16, now you know what you know in the industry and the experience that you've got. What would you tell yourself? What would you could go and relearn, if you like, at that point? What would you do differently?
I'd probably do the same things again, because it worked out quite well. Don't really. Maybe I'd tell them to go and watch this podcast. I know. I think there's a lot of focus when you're certainly at school and at university in particular. And we did talk about this. It's all about getting the right answers, and you get rewarded for having the right answer. Unfortunately, if you take on the path of a control software engineer, the assumption is you're going to have the right answer. And you don't really get rewarded for it. Like, people don't come up and continually tell you, "Oh, congratulations, it works again."
Yeah.
But they absolutely continually tell you when it doesn't work or when it's done wrong. So your mindset has to change when you get out of school and university, because it's not just about getting the right answer. You don't really know the answers yet. That's where the engineering comes in. And part of engineering is fixing what goes wrong.
Yeah.
And it does go wrong. And it unfortunately goes wrong quite a lot, to a greater or lesser extent. So I think you have to get over that pretty quickly. Early on, I've seen some graduates who I was working with. I'd been out like 2 or 3 years, and there's a few things where people were like getting, I don't know, kind of starting to feel negative about things because people were telling them it's wrong, or you're getting a review of your work done, and you don't like the feedback. Like, get over it.
Yeah.
We're not here to award you the way universities and I think schools are there to award people just for getting the answers right. And we want to, when we review your work, you have to go and do it again and fix it. And that feedback's something you got to learn to just take as part of the job. We don't believe everything is done perfectly right by one person all the time, and certainly in the safety related industries. And it has been proven that through simple things like review, independent verification and testing, following standards and guidelines that to you may seem common sense or perhaps stupid, are there for good reason, because they all remove the systematic error from ultimately what's a safety relevant product. And none of these products have gone wrong intentionally.
No.
That's the biggest thing. Like, they all go wrong because of possibly random failure of hardware. But unfortunately, more common than not, they go wrong because of systematic error, which means the engineers did their development wrong. That's simple fact. And worse still, in the oil and gas industry, there's obviously been loads of catastrophes that were due to human error. So you're looking at the process side of things there. I mean, there's lots of things. Chemical Safety Board has some great videos on how very good, well-dialed processes were ignored by the humans. They weren't ignored by the electronics or anything else. It was the humans that did it wrong.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you've got to realize, if you want to work in these industries, you've got to have an appreciation for it. And you've got to kind of respect the end product for what it is.
Absolutely.
And it's software. For me, it's software that goes wrong.
Yeah.
So we do what we can to try and minimize the failures.
I think when we've had a discussion as well, we've talked about that interaction between high-level controls software into embedded hardware and looking at the relationship with hardware. And obviously your grounding ultimately started at some hardcore embedded C development, didn't it? And it seems to have done you a world of good through your career.
Yeah, and I don't know if I was that exposed to the hardware at that point. We were running on, God knows what we were running on. We were just signing into a terminal screen.
Right.
But I think what I found in the oil and gas job was that I was lucky enough to bring hardware up from the ground level, literally the bare bone micros on a bunch of MSP devices by Texas Instruments. But you had no choice but to understand what the hardware does and how to configure it for the functionality you require of it. And I think there's a ton of controls engineers in automotive. There's definitely a ton of engineers out there who do not understand the underlying embedded hardware upon which their product runs, because their product ultimately is software.
Yeah.
And they're more and more distanced from it. We used to get our hands dirty debugging the code a lot more back in the day than, say, application engineers have to now. They're all in the model-based environment. Last 15 years, they've been abstracted away from it through autocode.
Yeah.
It's really only recently we would have trusted autocode to go on any production intent product. Certainly the last 10, 15 years. So
it's interesting, isn't it?
That's I think it's dumbing down it's debatable whether the dumbing down of the role where you have to actually program the software as well has been, whether the capability of the autocode is, up to it. Seems to be pretty good now, but there's plenty of cars out there that are almost 100% autocode.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think it's pretty sad that people don't understand the final zeros and ones that land on the controllers and what the controller's actually doing and all the services it provides. Because then they don't really if you're going to become a systems engineer, you should understand much more of that, so that you understand how to use it to deliver the full system function.
Absolutely. It's some really good advice to take from that. To be quite honest with you, looking at your tips to future engineers coming through, I think one of your key messages, and you're living it right now, is ultimately you've had that great blend between living your life whilst all blended with your career, really. And how do you do that, Jamie? To be honest, is it an easy transition? What does that look like?
I think it's as easy as I don't do the things that I still spend a bit of time in Canada. I do, like, maybe each weekend I'm up here, I'll get to ski.
Yeah.
I don't do anything during the week.
No.
Like, you don't have time. We have a young family. I'm not going to pretend I'm spending time with them during the week. I'm usually sitting in this office if I'm here.
Yeah.
And if I'm not sitting in the office back here, I'm down majority of the time down in the Bay Area, and it's the same. Then you just sit in the office, get work done, then go home at night, eat your dinner, go to sleep. But on weekends, I've always preserved the weekends. That's all that I care about. You can do whatever you want during the week, regards work.
Yeah.
But come weekends, for me, it's kind of game over. That's when I'll go and do things. Down the Bay Area, there's lots, and that gave me the chance, because the family aren't around when I'm there. I go and do my own thing, go golfing. Can mountain bike in Santa Cruz now, so that kind of keeps my interest in that. And then whenever I come back here, we take the trailer away camping during the summer, or on weekends there'll be at least one day skiing.
Brilliant.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, you just got to find time to do things. And I don't mind giving up the time in the week for work, as long as the companies I work for don't assume that it's a 7-day-a-week thing. It's got to be pretty important to take somebody's weekend away. And again, back to the North American mentality, they'll pretend they work every hour God sends. America's no more productive than Europe in that regard. So I've never really bought into the 7-day-a-week mentality. And actually, I think there's all the chat right now about 4-day weeks and things like that. A couple of the companies I've been in have, I think at Delphi, we had every Friday afternoon off. And then at my last, the oil and gas company I worked at, we'd put in a Flex Friday scheme where we did 9 hours a day for, I think, 9 days, and then we had every other Friday off. That gives back. Like, we were no way more unproductive than other companies I've been in. If anything, we got more done.
Yeah.
And people were more focused and intent on getting things finished while they were there because they knew they would. It gives a lot of time back to your employees on like long weekends. If you have that Friday afternoon off and you can get ahead of certainly in the UK, you'll know like the bank holiday weekends are chaos.
Absolutely.
You could get away early or you could take a half day on a Friday and have the full day off.
Yeah.
And, you could make much more of the time away from the office.
Absolutely.
So I think that's it. Like, to be startup culture are a little different. I mean, there's a lot of work you're trying to get done in a very short space of time. But I think a truly successful startup is one that transitions out of that chaos once they're in production and is able to give back, to their employees some work-life balance, or what is the point? What's your actual success been?
Yeah.
A business's success is its employees, not just its bottom line. And there's a way more going on in a company than just the money. So yeah, I don't know. You got to make it happen for yourself. If you don't like it, you have to leave. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
There's no reason for you to stay at a company if you don't like it.
No, absolutely. You got to make your own path, haven't you? And it's quite clear that you've been able to do that and do it globally, not just locally.
Yeah, the world's not a big play. I mean, I've never really been outside of. I did think about going into Europe, but then Canada thing came up. So like moving to Canada is not that tricky for a British person.
No.
And then once you're in Canada, you come in on a PR or a work permit, and then you can work towards your citizenship. And once you have your Canadian citizenship, you've opened up North America.
Yeah.
Because they have the NAFTA treaties and things that allow you to work down in the States.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's something. If people want to travel, they should look at those ways of doing it.
Absolutely.
I don't know how easy it is in the UK anymore now that the Brexit thing's happened, but it used to be super easy.
It used to be super, absolutely.
Yeah.
Going back technical, looking at the industry, if somebody's going to come into the industry, we looked at the growth, or we've briefly talked about the growth of model-based techniques across software systems, etc. What do you envisage from a technical perspective? How do you envisage the technical trends across EE to continue over the next 5-10 years?
Well, I think the world's woke up to model-based development at component level.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen by accident. And pictures speak 1,000 words and all that. Now, I'm obviously in systems engineering now, and probably always have been, to be honest. But if you take a single component level design, you take the complexity of software, there's so many parts in it, there's so many interfaces, whether your interface is a physical material flow or an energy flow, or whether it's a software signal, it's all the same thing. As you bring all these components together into more integrated systems, they're just, systems of systems. And all those tools and all the model-based techniques that have proven themselves on the software elements of the system are now being looked at and are being successful in the systems end of the system.
Yeah.
So model-based systems engineering to me is a total no-brainer.
Yeah.
Like, there's too many people still focused on it's kind of interesting. People will talk all day about requirements. They still seem to believe, and certainly in automotive, they just go on about requirements all the time. They never go on about how do you arrive at the requirements. And in systems engineering, there's all those other pillars of architecture, behavior, and all these things we explore to try and arrive at the requirements that we will cascade to others and against which you will ultimately test.
Yeah.
You can't do those other steps with you can maybe do it once and you might be successful doing it for, in flowcharts and PowerPoints and everyone's favorite Microsoft Office tool. But all that work and effort you've put in is not maintainable. It's not scalable. It's informal, and there's really no intelligence behind your diagrams or, architectural deliverables and behavioral deliverables that you've put together. So, and the really hardest part is the maintenance of it. It's an absolute nightmare. But now you move to the model-based techniques. Now you're going to start obeying some rules and guidelines as you bring up your model.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to be working in the same consistent language. That language can actually be, it can be, just as we statically analyze code, we can statically analyze the models.
Yeah.
That starts to make it more maintainable, allows you to scale your teams, allows you to scale your business, allows you to do again what you did on your first product because you can reuse. Like, try successfully reusing a stack of PowerPoints and whatever else people choose to use. I'm just, I've never really liked doing it in the document-centric approach. Even the requirement that we developed a couple of times now, I've developed intelligent Word templates that help maintain the integrity of requirements within the document and across documents. And we would then do traceability analysis using Perl scripts. And it was successful for small products, but you can't scale it to something like a car. It's totally ridiculous to even try. So these model-based environments exist to do that. And I do think, maybe coming back to the engineers that are leaving school today, I know there's some bodies out there who are going around schools and universities to understand which ones are focusing and also on the techniques like model-based systems engineering. Maybe in the automotive world, do people get some, if they're going to come out and do software, do they get any exposure to things like automotive SPICE and the ASPICE standards of like the bare bone basics of what it should be to develop software in automotive? Now, does any automotive controls engineer worth their salt come out of university with an understanding of the functional safety standards? I'm going to suggest they don't.
Yeah.
Which is not right. If they've ever got time to learn something, it's when they're at university.
Yeah.
But instead, they'll struggle to find time to go on a 3 or 4 day course once they're in industry. Now, you got loads of 3 and 4 days in university that you could sit and be taught this stuff. And that'll do you way better in the long run than chewing on a textbook and understanding the theory and all the first principles of control theory, which, ultimately you'll probably get from a MathWorks or Simulink library and never think about it again. So there's, it's the model-based methods, certainly for systems engineers, the only ones I'm interested in talking to now are people who understand the model-based methods. We will bring in some greener graduates. We will give them the opportunity to learn it. And we've also been learning how we want to apply it ourselves. But you're probably not going to get, if you're in a stack of resumes and you cannot identify the model-based approaches to systems engineering, you're probably not going to get through the first filter.
No.
If you can come in and say you've got SysML or model-based certifications, which you can get online off your own back in the event your university is ignorant to it, then go and do it. Like, take 4 or 5 days out of your life and go and do them. Like EDX has a lot of things. The Nkosi websites have lots of information on it. There's, nowadays on the internet, you can learn an amazing amount of things and teach yourself. There's even open source SysML tools out there, I think, run inside the Eclipse environment.
Very interesting. Interesting.
So if your university's not teaching you everything that you think you need, there's plenty of other places to go and get the information, and you will get ahead of people when they're filtering resumes.
Especially from an early stage, I think if you can learn the functional safety life cycle and the stages, learn or understand and do some research on ASPICE, like you said, genuinely understand model-based systems engineering techniques, you're getting ahead of the curve immediately, aren't you?
Yeah, I think you won't be as maybe overwhelmed when you join a company that is maybe at the forefront of using these methods.
Absolutely.
And I'd also suggest don't go into the companies that perhaps aren't, because they will eventually do it, and you might as well go with the more forward-looking ones.
Absolutely. It's a really good insight. Similar question, but looking at the industry as a piece. What what do you see that's up and coming in the industry from an automotive perspective, Jamie? We've looked at the EV spectrum and the technology development across the EV space, but what, from your perspective, do you envisage happening over the next 5-10 years from a technology development perspective?
I think the autonomous, the EV thing appears to be happening, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
I'll let others can decide where it ends up.
Yeah.
But I think EVs are around to stay. Maybe hydrogen cars will come in. Who knows?
Yeah.
I think there's opportunities for all the different powertrain configurations. Let's say cars more generally. The autonomous driving things increasingly talked about. I personally like driving my car. I've not really used a assisted driving or autonomous driving system yet that I thought made my. No, there's things called taxis and buses. You could just get in those. If you don't want to drive. I'm not a naysayer on that stuff. I think it's pretty interesting. I think what's going on today though with the assisted driving things they're just poking around the periphery of what can be achieved. So it looks like a nice user-facing feature right now, but that's not really the end game. The end game is these experiments, let's say, that are being ran by companies with all these features and functions. They're going to come together into something much smarter that hopefully makes roads safer. And maybe they already have with like lane assist and collision avoidance systems. But I know there's people working on, in the event, and this will be very unusual, but if automotive companies can get together and agree on a standard between which the cars communicate, and traditionally automotive don't really agree to do much together. If they did, the swarm kind of mentality thing where the cars talk to each other as an event is happening, or the cars in your immediate vicinity tell each other, by the way, I'm about to brake. So they kind of do that today, maybe, and maybe some of the more advanced autonomous driving systems can see the brake lights. But it's reactive. Can't it be more preemptive in what it does? And you could have them communicating to each other. And I believe there's companies looking at it. I think some guys I know in the UK work with one of the research agencies who I think have been looking into this, where when a crash happens, all the cars automatically start going their separate ways to avoid it. And those are the things that I think will be really useful. And 100%. There's car sharing, I'm sure, will come in. As which I think could be really good. I've seen some articles a little while back where they were talking about how the urban landscape it'll be given back to us if we can get the car sharing schemes up and running properly, where you summon a car and it comes to you, but the cars do not have to be parked on your road outside your house. And actually that'll have side effects on safety. Like if cars are not being parked at the side of roads, roads will be safer. They'll be safer to cross. People won't get hit by cars as they're running out between parked cars because there won't be parked cars.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think there's a picture somewhere of New York between when the Model T came out, and it was like a 2-3 year turnaround. All the horses had vanished, and the very same photo was taken, and there was all cars on the road. Some people rumor the inverse could now happen, where we get our city streets and everything back because there won't have to be as many cars on the road.
That's a really interesting concept.
So I don't know. I think that's probably in our future. I don't know how far off in the future. Ultimately, people will still want to drive cars. People still ride horses. So it's not like every car is going to be autonomous. That's never going to happen.
No.
Well, I don't know. We'll see. But it's definitely the area where I think most of the interesting stuff's happening on a car today. I think that's a given. And there's a lot in powertrain we'll do with range and efficiency. Lucid obviously on the leading edge of that, and that'll allow us to bring down battery pack sizes, minimize the impact on natural resources. Cars will become cheaper, more people can use them. That's all going to happen as well in parallel, but probably the big game changer are the autonomous driving aspects of it.
Absolutely. the final question, just related to some of the technology development that's happening, is what would you recommend people to do? Would you recommend that they become specialists within certain areas, i.e. BMS specialists, inverter specialists, overall EV specialists, or would you go down the broader route? It's not necessarily a right answer here, but what's your opinion on that?
You need both, don't you? You need the specialists in the company. Yeah. And there's people like that just want to focus on one thing. But if you're going to be a systems engineer, you'll probably choose a domain that you're interested in.
Yeah.
Maybe it's thermal, powertrain,
maybe
software systems. I don't know. But I don't know. I don't know if anybody really knows when they are at university.
No.
I mean, I never thought I would. Or maybe I did think I'd work in oil and gas at some point, but I went and did that, and I learned a lot. Diesel engine control, EVs never existed. So, well, there was a Sinclair C5, but I don't know if that counts. Maybe most people don't remember the Sinclair C5.
Interesting.
It was an electric mobility, let's say. I wouldn't call it a car.
No.
I don't know. I think systems engineers need to be generalists.
Yeah, okay.
Software engineers should understand software. And I think if you're going to be if you're interested in just technology, then, and if you understand complex systems, you don't need to know the ins and outs of everything, because nobody does.
No.
But as a systems engineer, you should at least be a generalist. You should know where to stop and allow the domain expert or component level expert to take over. I suppose it's like a project manager is meant to be cross-functional, aren't they? And meant to be able to talk to all the people in an appropriate way just to get the level of information they need, which would be to manage cost, schedule, and budget, and nothing more, even though some of them try to make technical decisions. The systems engineers are there to do the technical aspect of the cross-functional roles. So, we are able to talk to a level of detail with the right people and make the right decisions for the system. But there's people who want to be specialists. Why not? Someone has to.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we didn't have our specialists at Lucid, you wouldn't have a long-range, most efficient car in the world scenario.
No.
That's why we have it, because we have the specialists that know it inside out.
Absolutely. It's good insight. And the final question for you, Jamie, why, from your perspective, develop a career in the automotive industry?
Sorry, why? I've got to work somewhere. If you like cars, that would be a good start, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
There's other things going on in cars like now. Right, maybe that would draw people to it, infotainment systems and things. But I suppose on the other side, design side, the aesthetic of the car, that draws people to it. It's almost like on a car, there's every product there combined. And it's one of the most complex systems we've ever managed to produce. Yeah. As a society or whatever. So there's literally every single discipline on a car. Maybe not cookery and catering, but there's everything else, from the the interiors to the design to engineering. There's science all over it as well, material science. So they're really, if you go into a car company, there's probably a role there for absolutely everybody. Yeah. But you probably have to have some kind of inkling that you like cars. Yeah. So that's what drew me to it originally. Yeah. Chance to work on cars is pretty cool. Absolutely. Chance to work on new cars is really cool. Yeah. You're getting your hands on them 2-3 years before production. Yeah. That's never grown old. No. There's something really cool about that.
No, absolutely. It's a great answer. Listen, Jamie, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for all the insights. Really appreciate it. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yep. Sounds good.
Thanks, Jamie.
Have a good one.
You too.
See you later.